Welcome to another edition of MYB Cast, a podcast devoted to educating our followers to alternatives to self-care, wellness, and the somatic world of mind-body connection. Today we're featuring another episode of our series Portraits of the Pioneers. Portraits of the Pioneers is an in-depth look at those that have been actively involved in the exploration, the development, practice of somatic touch therapy since its early inception. Hi, I'm Richard Mack, and I'm here with my co-host Anna Marie Bowers. And today we're taking the second episode of our special guest, Gail Stewart, who clearly is a pioneer at the epicenter of this whole work. So, without further ado, welcome, Gail.
Thank you.
Welcome, Gail. You've talked a lot about your own experiences with somatic touch, and for this second segment, we're interested and curious in what kinds of observations you had working with clients when you're the one giving the somatic touch, not necessarily, I know it's a dialogue, so that's a awkward question, but what kinds of things do you see happen? Stories, a couple of stories about a couple of clients that you saw some changes happen with.
Okay. So first, I want to give you the sense of the scene of an individual session. And so the first thing I need to do is be sure I'm here when I open the door or when the person, in my case, comes up the stairs. And so the session begins with that atmosphere as they walk in of openness, right? Just kind of like, as come as you are, here you are, welcome. And I, of course, am in a state that Milton Traeger called hookup, which ended up being taken over culturally and meaning some other things. But what he was talking about was the connectedness to the field around him. Yeah. And that we're all in, right? So that sense of connectedness, of relaxation, certainly, peace, certainly, but sort of bigger than me feeling and relaxing into that sort of. So I'm there, person comes in, and of course, something happens. There's something there about relaxing, opening. So that already happens at the beginning, which means I get to feel I get to feel where they are. They're getting a sense of my interest, simple interest, being just, it's not forcing, it's not fixing, it's personal, but it's not involved. So that's already the touch that's starting. And wherever somebody is, whether they're really in a state of anxiety or they're already pretty happy, it begins to be an influence. And so what I notice and why people keep coming back is the progression of that openness. I notice comes that progression of that ease with themselves. And, that progress sometimes isn't visible from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
I once had somebody that I thought I just hadn't made any difference with, and I met her years later, and she told me I saved her life. Well, so what do you know? I don't know anything. I sort of had that feeling. So, but anyway, that's what's being projected, and that's somehow getting into the pores or the mental attitude, the emotional calm. And I see that to some extent with everybody. Physically, to a man or a woman, everybody, when they get up off the table, feel taller.
Mm.
There's nobody that doesn't feel taller. Now, what is that? Well, space for sure. You know, ease and muscles lengthening for sure. Alignment, therefore, just coming in easily. And Milton Trigger used to say, when people often would say, when people would sit up on the table, he'd run their hands up their back and he'd say, and they'd stand up and he'd maybe do it again. And he'd say, this is your perfect posture. And it was like about being in the moment, in that moment, with that amount of space which had accumulated or had been revealed in that session. At that moment, that was the perfect posture they could have in that moment. You know, it's so true. So there is this feeling of being lighter. The movement then is freer with that length. And usually we'll ask somebody to walk a little bit and they'll report what they're feeling. And sometimes people will report back to that pain that they had when they started. Yeah, it's still there. It's a little lighter. It didn't get fixed, right? Something else is happening. It's, yeah, it's sort of like, it's just a whole thing happening. So that's sort of with everybody, I would say. So if I talk about some kind of things that I've noticed with particular clients, you asked me to think about this, so I did think of one person in particular who has a light case of cerebral palsy. And he's been going around in his life and being helped or taught or whatever in his life by all of his practitioners to be normal. Okay. And he's been trying to be whatever that is and coming across as much as he possibly can as whatever that is, and maybe hiding a little something, and at the same time, you know, working out, doing all this stuff. And he is very functional, absolutely. But he decided at some point, this was before he saw me and why he saw me in a sense, he decided to come out as who he was.
Yeah.
With a slight case of cerebral palsy. And so he came out to me with that, and he wanted me to help him, not to fix his cerebral palsy really, but although he didn't say that, I'm getting that as in retrospect. He wanted me to work on him to help him because a former Traeger practitioner who was related to his girlfriend had given him a couple of touches and then told him to come see me. So that's what happened. So he liked what he felt. So the third time he saw me, he sat down in a chair afterwards for a little bit. We talked a little bit, and he said, you know, he said, when I've gone to other people, except for this one person when I was in elementary school, who was a occupational therapist. When I've gone to these other people, they're always trying to make me normal. And he said, with you, I feel whole.
Wow.
That was my response also.
Very,
Very,
yeah. Yeah.
And that was such a gift to hear that, because it puts it into, it says it all. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does. It really,
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
Well, once again, with your ability to come into the ether of the whole person, coming into that space with your hookup, which is what you showed me in the early 90s when I was just exploring this work.
Mhm.
I do quite a bit of work with cerebral palsy. I have been working with athletes that have, been diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and I've touched hundreds of them and have seen quite a bit of transitions. But I'm coming from it, and I'm sitting on the edge of my chair listening to you talk because the exact same thing that I felt when I was in level one of Traeger, and then I sat in your class for level two and saying, oh my God, this is completely different. Well, my work with cerebral palsy is working with the soft tissue, using the nervous system, transmitting a new message to the brain. Neuroplasticity takes that, stores it in a healthy part, and then slowly they start to get motor skills because it's not a structural issue, it's a functional issue. So if you give them the ability to recreate patterns that help them utilize that, that's great. But what you're saying is even deeper than that, is that, I take for granted that they're coming in and they want to perform. They're on the field. They're in the Olympics. They want to improve their performance. So we're focused on that. But what you're just sharing, bringing them into a place of that being who they really are inside themselves and not being fixed, is a much, much deeper subconscious template of who that spirit is inside them. That blew me away, what you just shared. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I really appreciate what you just shared. So I hope I get to see this recording again. Yeah.
Oh, you will.
You will.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any particular clients that really changed your practice as a result of working with them? They impacted you in some way that changed your practice?
Well, I'll tell you something that's kind of simple, very simple. I worked with this one man who then went to, he traveled for his work and he went to Japan and he worked with a Traeger practitioner in Japan. And she brought up the word mentastics. And he said, what are mentastics? And so she said, well, you go back and ask Gail. So he came back and he said, told me the story. And I said to him, because he had come to me for his back, I said to him, well, you remember that little kick I showed you? He said, oh yeah, ever since I've done it, my back hasn't hurt. So I thought, okay,
Fantastic.
that's fantastic. So it made me kind of, it changed something for me and about how I worked with my clients. I don't need to give it a name, of course, but to recognize again how something so simple, when it's felt and integrated, makes such a big difference. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, you're doing this work and you're with people and you're really in the moment with them and you maybe give them some homework, something to remember, something you would like to, some good feeling they had that you want them to remember. But you may not get the opportunity to ask what changed. So I do that a little bit more now. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah. I have another client who's the opposite thing, who is now also a student. And she said to me, she came back to me, she said, I can't say, she's had several sessions and she's taken a level 1 training. She says, I can't say that Traeger has helped my back. She said, but you know what? What Traeger does is it gives me joy. So I thought, okay, well, that's not too bad.
Do you like joy? Joy's not a bad thing.
She's totally there. And one of the things I remember Milton saying about backs, by the way, since we're there, I just want to say that he had spondylolisthesis. And he used to say, once a bad back, always a bad back, referring to that particular situation. He said, but you can move in different patterns, a different way by taking in this feeling experience. And that can become dominant. And so I'm going to work with this person a little bit more with that and see where we go. So she's changing me right now, you know.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Always curious.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Simple interest. That really resonates with me, that statement that you made about simple interest in another person, in a situation, in a group, in whatever. Just that simple interest. And it kind of hit me as similar to curiosity. Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah. 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 There's something about there is no pressure. There's great openness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's acceptance in there because I'm interested in what's here, not, I'm interested in you, not, yeah. And I don't even know who you are, but right, that's the curiosity. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything ever really surprise you?
Yes. I have one client who came to me because of anxiety. And the second time she came, this is a person probably in her 70s and really suffering, you know. And the second time she came, she sat up on the table and I looked at her face and she looked about 14 years old. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't help this. Can I take your picture and show it to you? And we were both amazed. We were both amazed. That was a surprise. That was a big surprise. Yeah. She came one more time and I've never seen her again. And I don't know if it's because she's free of anxiety or if it didn't work, but you know.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny about you mentioned taking the picture because you know, I just don't work with athletes. I work with all kinds of people, and you know, anxiety and stress brings a look on your face that is just your face just tightens up, and it's you're out there battling the world. And after doing a 70-minute session with somebody, you know, and they're looking like an angel on the table, I take a snapshot of that and I send it to them after the session because I check in after, you know, 24 hours after a session. I just want to make sure that everything is okay because I know you were in a different place when you were in a room, and I just want to see how you're doing with that. And the bottom line is that if you're not looking, this is who you are. When you're relaxed and you're that parasympathetic ventral vagal state of being that beautiful essence of a human being that you are, which, by the way, is you. And if you're not that, it's up to you to get to that again. That's what you need. This is your picture. This is who you are. And I do. They come in. I say, take a look at that picture. When you're not looking like that, schedule another session.
Richard, you are a good teacher. Wow. Yeah.
Well, I've had people like yourself that I've been very, very fortunate enough to meet that have definitely made that.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
The other thing that I'd like to share is that, I'm really caught up on this, what you mentioned earlier about this whole opening somebody up, because that picture is an example of that, right? When they're in
Mm-hmm.
that ventral state, they're just in their space. They're in their world. They're experiencing what they want to experience. They're not being defensive or they're just there. And that's a gift. That's who we are.
Yeah.
I have a couple of athletes that I've worked with, and I started with them when they were very young, 7, 8 years old, and some of them now are 18. And that's an interesting transition. And to the point that you made before about working with cerebral palsy and fixing them, I didn't realize it, but being in the tribe of cerebral palsy, your teammates, your friends, if you don't have that signature, you're not in the tribe. And in this one case, this one girl that I was working with, we did this whole thing about having her tie her shoes with both hands because she had, well, in her case, she had a situation where at 6 months old, somebody fell on her and crushed her skull, and there was a major repair in that process. And the remains of that is still cerebral palsy on part of her body. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that she owns that. That's part of who she is. That she knows nothing other than that. Since 6 months old, that's who she is. And I see her now because I'm going to be going back to another movement and cognition conference in Cambridge in 26. And I would like to talk about some of these kids that I worked with when they were 6, 7, 8 years old. Now they're in their 20s. How did they progress in that process? And of course, this conference, we're talking to scientists, we're talking to doctors, and we're talking about somatics. We're talking about, I'm not using operations here. I'm not using Botox. I'm not using any of that stuff that the medical world is dealing with these people. But what you're sharing with me, which I wish I had this conversation 10 years ago, is that I needed to accept who they are and what they're dealing with. That's their tribe. That's how they recognize themselves. That's how they identify with themselves. Now, as they get older, their tribe is changing. You're driving, you're going out on dates and stuff like that. And, your world has changed. Um, but I just wish that, well, it's never too late. It's just a matter of taking this conversation that you and I are having right now and realizing that what you've just said, which is really important, is that you're taking somebody along their
Mhm.
journey, not a physical journey, not a physical backache release, none of that. It's that ability to accept. So thank you for that. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Simple interest
Mhm. Yeah.
and
I remember one time uh, I was in a hot tub with a bunch of people, and somebody's uh, somebody's foot was touching my foot, and it struck me this was touch without agenda,
Mm.
ah,
and it was wonderful. Yeah. So just
that's another great phrase, touch without agenda, speaks to acceptance, speaks to
mm,
simple presence.
mhm, mhm,
So
Wow.
as somatic practitioners, question that keeps occurring to me is how can we bring this forward into the future? How can we bring this out of our one-on-one client work into a broader space?
And I'm going to take that opportunity to have a cliffhanger ending for episode 2 and invite people back to episode 3. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Hey, thanks.